Chapter 9. Explaining the double attraction paradox through the memoir, Attraction as a Hidden Mask. Before we begin, I'd like to share something personal. This chapter presents a narrative account of my experience with a high school crush. Beyond the story itself, it includes lessons and an analysis that explore attraction, limerence, and adolescent social experiences. A standalone memoir adaptation of this narrative, Attraction as a Hidden Mask, is also available on Amazon Kindle, which will soon be released on the 26th of June. Here we go! Attraction as a Hidden Mask. A fresh start marked my senior year. It had been a year since I began to live and adapt to societal norms in New York City. I entered the cafeteria and saw new faces while I was greeted by my old friends. One of them was a former classmate from my English class. The other was from my French class. Because I was still new to an Americanized high school, I only knew them as casual friends. Over time, our friendship gradually grew when we became seatmates in our school's MoMA weekly activity. I walked with him across the Upper West Side of Manhattan after a long day of field trips at the American Museum of Natural History. Meanwhile, I collaborated with the other boy in my French class during group activities. Despite his shyness, I did not expect how quickly things would change when his silhouette appeared at my lunch table. Apart from this platonic reunion, I was also welcomed by new people. I was introduced to his comrade who soon became my mentor during my deja vu era. Regardless of his introversion, he possesses both social and emotional intelligence. Seeing another peer offer mentorship to others was a past experience I could relate to. It reminded me of my online bestie who struggled to cope with depression, or a former high school student whom I inspired to pursue his talent and creativity in computer science, and eventually become a successful alumnus with ambition. The first months were mostly at the surface level of the onion theory. We were only introducing ourselves as peers with various talents, hobbies, and backgrounds. At the same time, I was introduced to new unfamiliar teachers who would soon inspire me to make this podcast through their intellect and their dedication to scholastic activities across various fields such as literature, calculus, senior thesis, and biology. I had been glued to my seat listening to lectures ranging from psychoanalysis and artifact composition to discussions about my own dharma and self-acceptance. I realized that peers and bookworms can be academically smart or social in clubs, but ultimately, it is how we invest our knowledge toward survival and creativity that shape our life values. Altogether, intelligence combined with action, consistency, and discipline influences our perspectives. For instance, grades are not the only predominant source of determining scholarship or our ability to succeed in life. It is also our imagination and our willingness to transform our ideas into realities of success and happiness while reflecting on our past mistakes. With that said, this is where the double attraction paradox actually began. During the first few weeks of autumn, I was stunned by a girl who possessed ambition and carried herself with neatness and composure across those lunch tables. Her physical silhouette stood within my line of sight. I was struck by how familiar she seemed, reminding me of my nonchalant bestie from the Caribbean. Their faces seemed to overlap in my mind despite existing across two different dimensions, locations, timelines, and genders. The halo effect struck me as I began to assume that her social cues mirrored the confidence and equanimity of my Grenadian comrade. However, I was about to fall into a mental looping cycle. My eyes could not keep off her physical silhouette. I could not understand why her beauty was so striking to me. Was it because of my intimidation or my consistent staring? Were my eyes not captivating enough? During the month of October, I was eventually caught in a staring competition in the hallways. Entering those lunch tables turned into a search for answers regarding my own prestige. She appeared to look in my direction every time I entered long lunch lines. Perhaps I might have triggered intimidation or agitation within myself, or perhaps I was simply becoming more aware of her presence. My thoughts became condensed. I became inquisitive about her eye contact and began to wonder, what if I stared back at her? It felt like a competition for dominance and subconscious intimacy. The next day, I decided to reciprocate. And oh my gosh, I fell into awe and paralysis. Whether it was simply her natural resting face or not, I kept moving along the queue with apprehension. I began to question why my subconscious silhouette entered her line of sight as I sat near the stairwell. From the reflection of a door-shaped mirror to the dismissal of sixth period, we began staring consistently across the school hallways. It felt odd and increasingly uncomfortable. Fast forward to November. Can you imagine how eye contact shifted from silent staring to mirroring? I was passing her mannequin, but as I turned back to look at her, her eyes were directed towards my silhouette. The next day, I had an impression that the encounter had spread through a network of friends. The phrase, "he passed me," became a phrase that lingered throughout my senior year. Moreover, I remember the time where I said, "Thank you, miss," to the staff. I never knew what vocal mirroring was, but that exact phrase was the turning point of autumn. We had been establishing rapport and reciprocation. This was when I had to do something out of my comfort zone to build upon clarity, or that was what I thought I could do. I began searching for clubs to participate in extracurricular activities, socialize with people, or gain community service hours. When I looked at the Instagram page of a random club, seeing her name and silhouette was like a thunderbolt. It felt quite odd to join a club with a stranger who subconsciously built rapport with me. I was second guessing my actions, but my gut told me to join for those very reasons. On the day of the meeting, I was introduced to preening, along with a habit of touching and twirling her hair, behaviors associated with self soothing and increased attentiveness around someone of interest. A needle activity changed everything when I began to join in and show my potential. This was my first time engaging in an activity with people I had never met. It was the turning point of my timeline in November. My eyes began to open as I saw reciprocity and awe for the first time, something I had never experienced with a crush before. I was stunned by her engagement and proximity. Paralyzed, I found myself alone with her in a room, accompanied only by the ticking of the clock. This was when I began to follow her on Instagram. I was trapped in my own curiosity and diminishing sense of self-awareness. During winter break, I never understood my emotions. Despite how much work I have put into my YouTube videos, I began to monitor my own social media, wondering whether she was viewing my content or not. Her presence felt like a drug. I became so addicted to it that I could not stop replaying the lingering images of her beauty and the consistent stares across those dull hallways. Each night, I felt more sluggish, agonized by an idealized image that may not even form a real conversation. Christmas was the peak of my discomfort, a time when I hid my anxieties from loved ones. While I had imagined that she might have been navigating her own overwhelming emotions, my friends diagnosed my paranoia and workaholicism. I never told them the exact reason. In fact, I was both egoistic and dismissive of my own thoughts. A brand new year, 2026. Upon returning to school, I was met with push and pull cycles and the social performance of high school life. People had been interacting with one another through social media, whispering messages between ears and teasing one another across tables. It was euphoria on the outside, but on the inside, it was doubt and impatience. I was waiting for a chance to break the ice, something I had always wanted if I could turn back time. Now, I understood what it meant when she passed near my table, whether she would walk past my side or approach from the front. That was when I began to understand how people with crushes may use proximity to subconsciously build familiarity, attentiveness, and rapport. I was also fortunate enough to observe a mirror of the emotional synchrony we once shared. For instance, one time when I became disappointed or overwhelmed with work, I noticed her body completely turned away, which I interpreted as a possible response to my emotional state. I could never imagine how a focal point could consume so much of our attention and sanity every single day. It felt like a puzzle that could only be solved by risking rejection or enduring the silence of a conversation that never began. Fast forward to Valentine's Eve, and we encountered each other in the school entrance. Upon my entry, I held the door and noticed her silhouette reaching for it. At the same time, I observed the other line moving effortlessly while I was sandwiched between her and another student in front of me. Time felt slow and steady during those limerent times. I scanned my card and continued walking along the corridor, but my curiosity could not stop dictating my own emotions. Once I looked back, I felt like Lot's wife turning into a pillar of salt. In other words, she summoned behind me, seemingly matching my pace. Her eyes darted around the hallway out of shyness. I could only assume that she felt unexpectedly noticed. That day was as special as it seemed. People would buy chocolates and flowers for their lovers, while others go up to their crushes and ask them out. I was not that type of person. Instead, I used my archived poem and turned it into a secret confession of my observations, which eventually became an artifact preserved within my upcoming podcast. I created a surprise by releasing it the next day, and I was startled when she changed her profile picture. Seeing her pink sweater reflected in her mirror reminded me of the previous day when I saw her physical silhouette. However, I did not expect it to completely change my behavior. I was more fragile, dependent, and comparative to other people's happiness. I ended up crying during those winter nights, seeing how it fueled my limerent thoughts. I was desperate for her validation and her thoughts on my poem, to the point that I constantly checked the analytics. I was at my most immature behavior during those days, yet despite how much silence continued to hurt me, I still reached out digitally, even while double guessing the risks, just as I had when I first followed her. Upon returning to school from the midwinter recess, I was introduced to side glances across the hallways, as well as feelings of paralysis, overwhelm, and anxiety. It's as if unrequited attraction had turned into obsession and peripheral monitoring rather than an act of clarity. This was a period when I felt ignored, watched, and treated as background static. Despite seeing nonverbal communication cues that suggested possible interest, we both remained frozen by our shyness and lack of direct reciprocation. I had no one to talk about this grueling experience. I was navigating my emotions independently while imagining that she may have had her own ways of processing stress. I released those emotions every night whenever I found moments of solitude, all the hidden tears from my limerence. Regardless of the class I took, the friends I had, or the talents I possessed, my obsession drastically changed my identity, and I became isolated from myself. Even if I had to experience the agony, I still chose to chase her and join her club to participate in activities and socialize with new people. Falling in love with potential was the unhealthiest thing I would have experienced in my senior year. I was deeply attached to my imagination rather than the current reality, and it was so difficult to concentrate on schoolwork or do the hobbies I used to like. I needed to find a way to protect my peace and move beyond these obstacles. Ultimately, I decided to cut her off digitally by temporarily muting her posts and stories as a survival mechanism. I've chased her long enough to the point where I no longer respect the time I should have been spending on my goals. This was the hardest decision I had to make. However, I began to discover the importance of balancing puppy love with rigorous travail. That's where I discovered a new idea, a podcast that teaches teenagers vocabulary and theories that they may have never heard of while archiving my own experiences. Believe it or not, this is where life began to reverse itself. Retrogradation and extinction bursts played their cards. Those cues I mentioned, the preening, the hair twirl, the proximity, the scopisthesia, the agitation, and the mirroring, they all came back, which I interpreted as a possible form of scarcity since I withdrew the attention I used to give. At one point, I began to notice her agitation when she saw my name one time. Another time, she would stand near me in the bathroom line and use vocal mirroring to match the way I talk to others. I even remember the time when there was a starstruck emoji with a hi and a heart drawn below it. It was next to my flawless calculus drawings on the whiteboard. These were moments that fueled my euphoria and appreciation, but at the same time, they led me to invest all of my energy into egoistic high school games. It was the push and pull cycle that created ambiguity in a passive situationship. Remember those he statements? I acknowledged them and recognized the hidden focal points and meanings behind them. I could only interpret them as a secret form of communication to gauge my attention and break the ice, but as someone who tried to do so back in February, it only overwhelmed both of us as we avoided social risks because of our egos. Comfort zones hinder our bravery and cause us to deliberately miss out on connections we genuinely want. Not to mention, authors may have an opinion and dictate our moves, which may sever the connection and mutual trust. As months went by, graduation was slowly approaching foot by foot. Her face began to look bittersweet. I wondered whether she too recognized that our connection was slowly fading away. My recovered confidence and art created a high voltage standoff as her friends appeared to mirror her shyness and overwhelm. From my flawless presentation to a grand ceremony and the promotion of my podcast, I realized how time flies in the blink of an eye. These events opened my eyes to the realities of peer pressure and high school performances. Because of our social status, beauty, intellect, creativity, or talents, we sometimes construct an ego shield that intimidates others and causes us to perceive them as beneath us or less worthy. Our friends may influence our behaviors by lowering another person's status, rejecting them, or creating shame in their identity to seek validation for themselves. And at the same time, the other person who feels emotionally drained tends to chase or burst into tears because of the ugliness of the push and pull cycle and the ego we tend to prioritize over genuine relationships. When navigating a high school crush independently or with someone else, each experience presents its own challenges. Whenever you have someone by your side, they help you navigate your emotions or counsel you to break the ice. However, it depends on the friends you hang out with. Some may try to discourage you from approaching your crush, while others may do the opposite. My mom told me an idiom that lingered in my mind. Birds of a feather flock together, to emphasize the importance of choosing the right friends who truly support your desires and ambitions and help mold you into a successful person. I kept all of my emotions and secrets buried deep within my own heart and used them to create this podcast, The Double Attraction Paradox. I revealed the non-verbal communication cues, the theories behind attraction, and the chemistry behind a crush to understand my own limerence and create a newer generation where adolescents and preteens do not have to dwell in ambiguity by helping them understand how to reciprocate, overcome their ego, and make others feel warm-hearted instead of devastated. May this serve as an important lesson for everyone before graduation. Maintain a healthy balance between academics and romantic relationships. Now, after hearing my story, let's take a step back and analyze it through different lenses. The first one, traditional high school social cliques. We often form groups based on shared interests, activities, or social status. These groups spend most of their time together and can become highly exclusive in terms of membership. Sometimes this exclusivity exists to preserve the group's integrity and maintain its shared interests and social norms. In my memoir, I reflect on how cliques often create an environment where individuals may feel the need to follow group expectations or social norms to fit in. Looking back, I sometimes wondered whether my crush's behaviors were influenced by her social circle. Perhaps there were expectations, spoken or unspoken, that encourage indirect behaviors such as appearing hard to get. Ironically, when most people do this, these protective behaviors unintentionally push others away, preventing genuine connections from blooming. This form of protection is what keeps a clique preserving its integrity while simultaneously preserving its social status intact. Then we have the fear of rejection, public exposure, vulnerability, and intimacy. Whether it is a first time crush or not, some individuals may feel shy around someone who has suddenly captured their attention and shifted their focus away from academics, hobbies, and friendships. Fear of rejection often develops as a way of protecting the ego. In doing so, some individuals may wish to maintain a certain image within their social circle, or present themselves as untouchable. However, despite these defense mechanisms, the body may subconsciously betray those intentions through nonverbal communication to hide their true feelings. This is why prolonged eye contact, proximity, mirroring, or preening can sometimes appear despite someone's attempts to remain emotionally guarded. Furthermore, some individuals may struggle with vulnerability or intimacy for deeper reasons. Experiences such as inconsistent caregiving, abandonment, or emotional neglect may influence how a person approaches relationships. Some people may begin to associate closeness with danger, betrayal, or pain. Hence, they may pull away from genuine connections and develop defensive or manipulative behaviors to protect themselves. Unfortunately, unresolved pain can sometimes be projected to others as well, leading to verbal, mental, or social harm. This is a reality that some people experience, and it's sad to see how deeply rooted these patterns can become. Finally, we have peer pressure. Apart from traditional high school cliques, peer pressure in any form of environment is when a social group influences an individual to change their behavior, values, or beliefs to match those of the group. Peer pressure can be both positive and negative depending on the circumstances. Some people encourage unhealthy behaviors such as substance use, bullying, or skipping school. Others may encourage personal growth by motivating their peers to study harder or adopt healthier habits. There are two forms of peer pressure: direct and indirect. Direct peer pressure involves physical or verbal demands that encourage someone to behave in a certain way. Indirect peer pressure occurs when individuals change aspects of themselves, such as their clothing style, speech, or mannerisms in order to fit in. Based on my interpretations, vocal mirroring may occasionally contribute to indirect pressure. Sometimes, individuals may try to change their wardrobe to match clothing, adopt another person's slang, tone of voice, or behaviors to build rapport and feel more equal to them. Applying this idea to my memoir, social penetration theory becomes particularly interesting, as human behavior often spreads through groups. If one member acts in a certain way, their emotions may subconsciously influence those of another person. This process is known as emotional contagion and empathy. Emotional contagion can build genuine social bonds, create supportive environments, and combat loneliness. However, negative emotions can also spread throughout entire social circles, leading to vulnerability, discord, and disruption. This case study leaves me with one important question. How can someone ever be friends with a person that they never talk to? Think about it for a few seconds. Okay. This question lingered in my mind because platonic relationships do not usually possess this level of emotional intensity. I believe that statements such as, "we're just friends," may arise for countless reasons, including emotional unavailability, protection of social status, fear of intimacy, testing the waters, and plausible deniability. Yet, nonverbal communication often tells a more complicated story. Prolonged eye contact, proximity, preening, mirroring, and many other behaviors may sometimes contradict our words by revealing genuine biological signs of attraction. This reality is especially painful during a first time crush because many adolescents are afraid of rejection. As a result, genuine connections are missed entirely. There is a saying that stayed within me throughout this experience. The longer you have a crush on someone, the harder you'll fall for them. Think about it for a few seconds. Okay, now I understood this firsthand because it reflects my limerence journey. Attachment and obsession can trap us inside mental loops that rob us of peace and clarity. And that is why I created the double attraction paradox. I shared my experience so that future generations do not have to repeat the same mistakes. I hope adolescents learn to understand attraction, recognize nonverbal communication, overcome their fear and ego, and avoid remaining silent when they genuinely care about someone. I named this series the Double Attraction Paradox because it represents a metaphorical mirror between two individuals who navigate a silence attraction through body cues, creating a paradox of mental looping, uncertainty, and lack of clarity. Perhaps the greatest lesson I learned from all of this is simple. Attraction may begin with mystery, but genuine connection requires courage, communication, and the willingness to move beyond silences. The lecture section of this series has officially come to an end. In the next season, I'll be dedicating episodes to interviews, music analysis, and many other topics. Meanwhile, I'll also be starting a new podcast that I've always wanted to create, an audiobook adaptation of my literature project, Kleptos, the Creature of Oystens. So stay tuned for that. If you've been listening to my previous chapters, perhaps you've found pieces of your own experiences reflected in mine. I truly hope these lessons linger in your minds and help you navigate your own journeys through attraction, uncertainty, and self discovery. And don't forget to check out my new book, Attraction as a Hidden Mask, available now on Amazon Kindle. But anyway, thank you all so much for listening to my very first podcast series, The Double Attraction Paradox. I couldn't have done this without you all. This is Remjane D. Craft signing off. Thank you.